Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We are back to what we started with. As we finish Maseches Bava Kama and embark on Maseches Bava Metzia in the 14th cycle of Daf Yomi, we are here to learn how Bava Metzia was learned throughout the ages. We always focus on some of the Rishonim, some of the Achronim, and we always find an Achron or two to dive into just a little bit. Happy to share that the episode that we did, which was titled "Was Rav Chaim a Paisik," has over 10,000 views. You have to listen to the episode to see if you really could answer that question. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the feedback, the emails. I've been in a few places since then, and people are coming over. They really enjoy the episode and in general what you do, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. So keep on plugging away, as they say, and keep on delivering the gems. So here we are. We're back to focusing on the Masechta that's being learned in the Daf HaYomi, how it was learned throughout the ages, and we're excited for this. And this episode, I must mention, thank you very much to our sponsor, Michael Hastin, who is dedicating this episode in memory of Lila Nishmas, his father, Mordechai ben Doyev, on his 4th yahrzeit. May his neshama have an aliyah, and all the learning, all the knowledge that we gain from this discussion should be an Eloi for his neshama. So, Rabbi Doctor, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we're going to begin like this. This is a Masechta that, as Daf Yomi is going to learn it, many people already know. It's a remarkable Masechta, which many learn during their yeshiva years. Not only that, many who begin learning, they begin specifically with the Masechta, this Masechta, Parak ALL Metzias, the second parak. And we already mentioned in the episode on Bava Kama a little bit about it, why it's picked to dafka learn from ALL Metzias. But B'kitzur, this Masechta has many practical aspects of Choshen Mishpat, specifically bein Adam L'Chaveiroi, starting with finding a Metzias, dealing with allegations of shaimrim, borrowing things, all these types of halachas, selling items, how to price items, complex ribish shailas, halachas of hiring people for jobs, and many other topics come up through this masechta. It's a very negeidik masechta in practical halacha. However, in yeshiva, the focus is much more on the lamdis, and we'll discuss a little bit about that throughout in different aspects in this episode. Now, obviously, it would be worthwhile in the day to find time, as they say, to look a little bit more into the numerous works that are out there, making it more current, as the halachas here are very relevant. Even people who are not in business, there's a lot of halachas that play out in their day-to-day lives. And when you learn this Masechta, and there's a lot of different aspects for it. Lamais has many different svarim. In English, Art Scroll has published a bunch. I couldn't even list them all out, but they have a bunch. Feldheim has a few. Just to mention one, Rabbi Badner has a book in I think it's published by Feldheim, and we'll discuss a drop about this towards the end. But this is just a point to mention about the
I neglected to ask you this when we started. Kobe, you'll get to this. It's worth mentioning that ALL Metzias is the parak in Maseches Bava Metzia that, for most, it's the first taste of Gemara that they have. Is there a Messiah to this? Is it something you're going to get to, or answer off the cuff?
I do not have an answer. I have been looking for an answer. How far back it is, I cannot answer. And why it is also, that we mentioned in the Bava Kama episode in the beginning, but I have not been able to find exactly how it developed and when it started. Maybe one day we'll get to having an answer. Maybe someone has an answer, or someone maybe did a study about it already. But it's very interesting. My first exposure was ALL Metzias. Still remember, we learned it by Rabbi Yaakov Kappel Alevi Berlovsky in Yeshivas Chaim Berlin, and it was my first ritva we ever learned, actually, also because he spoke out to us. Why is the Mishnah picking all these unique cases when you learn ALL Metzias? It's also very interesting. But anyway, that's we're not going to get to that in this episode, at least. Okay, now, B'kitzur, the presentation is going to show how this Masechta was learned throughout the ages, as we've done in the past. Now, obviously, this Masechta was learned because it was very negeya, and it still is negeya ariyot. However, what's going to come out from this whole episode is that they had learned it, and we're going to document that they learned it, but most of the material they did not have throughout the ages. Only in our generation, or maybe in the past 100 years, is an explosion of material specifically for Masechtas Bava Metzia, and through that we might be able to answer some interesting questions. What I'm going to do is put it in chronological order. I'm going to show, because I'm basically trying to show Bava Metzia was learned. So it was learned, but this, and I'll mention when I talk about specific stuff when the Sefer was actually published, and we'll see that a lot of it happens to come out much later on. Now, just three brief nakudas. As I said, we always try to find, there's always sources that say how they learned it in the yeshiva cycle, and it's going to be obvious from all the svarim here that it was part of the yeshiva cycle. Just to mention an early letter where this person is writing about how he is zeicha to learn in the yeshiva of Rav Avram Brady in Prague. This is way back in the 1700s. V'lamanu sham kam masechtas ubefrat habava isim taisis perushim v'chedushim betum tav madas. So this letter, which is published in Yerushalayim, Volume 4, a tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Rachlis, he writes, this is when he's a teenager, about 16, 17 years old, that he was zeicha to learn, and he's specifically spelling out the Bavas. But we'll see clearly that it was learned. Okay, this is one interesting thing about the Masechta, and just two other things before we jump right into it is like this. There's a volume called Darkei Chaim, which is a fascinating volume from Reb Chaim Yaakov Naftali Zilberger. And he has a letter where he's talking to someone about learning Bava Metzia. And he talks about the chashivas of the Masechta, and then he ends up saying that we find Kiyadua, the famous Gemara. If you want to get chachma, you should be Isaac in Dinei Mamanis. Then he says Shein Metzia b'Torah gadol mehen. And then he says befrat Dinei Mamanis, befrat Toyin Nitan, and he talks about this. He says then he brings in b'Metzia zeh yesh yoser eish hakdusha. Then he says, you should learn this Masechtas Bava Metzia. Shasham ikra pilpul b'perek shnayim oichsin kol daf gemara hishita b'fnei atzmai. V'sham ha'eish hagdoyle shebegalis ra l'lmoida b'feirdik. You should learn it with great simcha. This is a fascinating volume published before World War II of materials, and this is what he's giving it. So the unbelievable stuff going on about Metzia, and he has in this letter more about this. Okay, it's one. Second nakuda, and the third nakuda is in general about Choshen Mishpat, and specifically about this Masechta. It's kedai to look in the third parak of the Chazon Ish Emunah B'Tachan, where he starts off with a letter of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, where we're talking about, people are very involved with Midas. They don't realize that in the Nyan of Geneva and different aspects, which comes out very clearly when you learn Bava Metzia. The Chazon Ish brings this letter from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter about the asik of learning these halachas be'iyundik. Helps. It's not only about Musar, but this is how you learn aspects of Bein Adam Chaveiroi by going through it. And the Chazon Ish Gedarka B'Kodesh beautifully well in his incredible work. Chazon Ish Emunah B'Tachan Parag Gimel talks about this, elaborating on this Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Okay, now. So let's just go through very fast. We always mention very fast the Nuschais Talmud, the manuscripts of the Gemara. So of course, this Masechta still has from the Dukdukei Sefer, from his work. He had a few manuscripts of the Gemara. He had actually the Ramban, Tosfos Rosh, and Rashba manuscript, which we'll get to discussing later on. As far as mechkar or academic literature, we always just point out very briefly the mechkarim on this Masechta, the mechkarim of Shama Yehuda Friedman. He has two massive volumes on Parak Seiches Umnan, where he deals with the nusach of the parak and a beer of the parak, but he has throughout his volume Sugyas B'Cheker Talmud Bavli tons of information about the manuscripts of Masechtas Bava Metzia. It might even be more unique than other Masechtas, and one could ayin sham in his articles about this. And one other sefer to point out is there's a chibur from Professor David Henschke, a Goyin Olam, the person I know very well. I was able to actually learn by him. Mishnah Rishayna b'Talmudim shel Tanoim Achroinim, where he has a massive, beautiful work on the Shomrim, a lot of different aspects relating to the Dal Shomrim, which is a parak in Masechtas Bava Metzia. Now we go through we just say Talmud Yerushalmi. So already in Baba Kama we spoke about the chibur on Baba Kama, and there's just we forgot to mention the Stivus Yerushalayim from Avdaikas. Okay, Tosefta. So we always mention that there's the in Ezekiel there's the Magen Avram has a parish on Tosefta, the Chazi David has a parish on Tosefta, and Shaul Lieberman. And we already discussed in the episode that we just released, Reb Chaim Kanievsky said you're allowed to learn. It's going on auction. Maybe it was bought already. A letter. He was asked if he could learn this from Reb Chaim of Shaul Lieberman. He said he could. So we can mention that on Bava Metzia, Tosefta Bava Metzia, we also have the parish of Shaul Lieberman. Okay, Icon the Gemara. Then we always move in very fast to the Goinim. So Goinim we've always discussed already. It's a Goinim of Bam Levine. Now, more recent years, because of new discoveries, not for now, but basically Professor Brody and a team of people have found through much more material that was not available to Bam Levine, and they've already released it's published by Mechon Ofek, Eitzer Gainim, on Metzia, reissuing it with tons more material. Okay. Lamaisa, discoveries are always made, and even in the worlds of the worlds of Gainim. So there's a work, the two works, which we're not going to get into discussing what they are, but the one is known as Sefer Chayfetz, Sefer Mesiftas. So this work, there's a hiker that I've quoted a bunch of times, Professor Simcha Emanuel. So one of his things is he seeks out lost chiburim of Rishonim. So he's located materials relating to Masechtas Bava Metzia, long lost work of Sefer Chayfetz Mesiftas, new pieces that were not available up till now, and he's published them in his volume Meginze Europa. And once we're talking about his volume Meginze Europa, these are manuscripts, how he discovers it, he deals with it in the book, fascinating information. And in volume 2 of Meginze Europa, he also found another early work called Sefer Metzayis, also related to Bava Metzia. Okay, now we move into Rabbeinu Chananel. We've discussed them already in the past. So in Shas Vilna, when it came out, that one of the pluses that they had in many Masechtas is they have the Rabbeinu Chananel. This Masechta, if you look in Shas Vilna, does not have the whole thing, but because the manuscript that they had was only partial. Eitzer Gainim from Bam Levine, we just spoke about, he already started collecting it. From then on, various people had new materials, such as the Shidduch Kobetzes we'll get to, and the Sefer HaNer we're about to talk about. And Meister of Cook has published an edition which has much more material of Rabbeinu Chananel. And now that leads us to the next thing right away. Rabbi Zecharia Agamati. This is it's written around 1190. This is an early type of work of a Shidduch Kobetzes where he's collecting materials up to 1190. Shidduch Kobetzes has much later material, and it's published. It's known as the Sefer HaNer. In 2010, I think it's in 2010, the whole work comes out about Metzia in a legible manner. Earlier, it had come out in a facsimile edition, and what it has is a lot of material, Gainim, Rambam, and stuff like that. So on Masechtas Bava Metzia, Moshe Bloi, the famous Moshe Bloi, in the Shittas HaKamayim, he pulled out materials of Rabbeinu Chananel and other stuff, and that's part of what is found in his volume on Shittas HaKamayim, and and also Rabbeinu Chananel materials. Okay, now we go into the Rishonim. So Rishonim, here's where we already could start seeing. So all this material that we just discussed was not available throughout the generations. It existed, so we see that it was learned. But now let's go through the Rishonim. So if you, I've quoted in the past, you open up your Shem HaGedolim, he has a list of Svarim on Masechtas that he saw, that he was aware of, a lot of them manuscripts. So if you look in about Masechtas Bava Metzia, he just lists two things, Shidduch Kobetzes and the Ritva. Okay. Now, we'll get back to this shortly. Now, we know we have the right, someone, the Hagoyim Rav Nissen Alper, Talmud Muvuk of Rav Moshe Feinstein, put together two massive volumes where he gathered all different materials of the Ravid found in secondary sources from all the Rishonim that they bring from the Ravid, and he has Biurim on it. It's available, two massive volumes. I think it's still in print even. Okay. But this is not a whole. But we don't have. We believe that the Ravid did write a work on Bava Metzia. It's lost, but here we have the pieces from secondary sources. Okay, now let's move on to the Ramban. The Ramban they did not have throughout the ages until 1929. Hagoyin Rebbe Zal Meltzer, in a project of gathering all the materials of Ramban, which we discussed in the episodes of Chaim Kanievsky in the beginning of this in the season 2. He had this project and he printed from manuscript Ramban. Okay. Lamaisa, later on, Professor Tashma found another manuscript of some pieces which were not in the edition that Rabbi Zal Meltzer did, so he publishes it. And then later on, Rabbi Moshe Hirschler, when he publishes the Ramban, he has already a few manuscripts, some that Rabbi Zal Meltzer didn't have. Okay, so they published that. So today, when you go to the store and you buy your Chedushei Ramban, you have to keep in mind this was not around. The first time it even came into existence in 1929, and the volume that you have now is not even 50 years old. It's much less than 50 years old. Now, Teiras Ramban was known to the Gedolim when they learned this Masechta. Why? Because we have the Milchamas, which was printed in 1512, but not nearly as much. If you go through Chedushei Ramban, there's a lot of material that's not found in the Milchamas. Lamaisa, just like everything else, there's a new edition of the Milchamas on Bava Metzia, specifically with a fancy beer. It just came out from a Yid, Simcha Haber, this year, and basing it on all the editions, and also Ha'aris being aimed on all different things. Okay, so this is the Ramban. From his base medrash, we have the Rashba. When does the Rashba come out? Many Masechtas, it came out much earlier. This volume only comes out in 1931 from the Mechono of Dorvitz, which we also discussed him a little bit in the Sugyas of Zraim, with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the Shir Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Lamaisa, they published this from manuscript, and again today there's even more manuscripts. So Meister of Cook edition will even have it based on more manuscripts. We'll discuss a drop more about this shortly. And Lamaisa, there's a chibur of the Talmud of the Rashba or so it's believed, found in the sheet back to the sheets. So this is again with Ritva, Rajba. Sorry, this is now the Ravid, the Ramban, the Rajba. So, but all this again is only taking place in our century. The Ritva. So the Ritva, this on this Masechta, this is an interesting story. What's the story is like this. There's a Chuvas Maram Galanti. In 1608, it's published. And over there, he has material of what he calls the Ritva until Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Okay? L'maisa, the whole Masechta of the Ritva is published in Taf Pei Tes. That is 1729. So in 1729, it's published for the first time. But already people started noticing that this cannot be the Ritva for various reasons. Shem Gedolim has a Arichos Nifla, and he seemed to keep on coming back to revisit it, and he deals with it in Shem Gedolim. Today, in the standard Shem Gedolim, all the pieces that he came are all put together al Pia Seder, but it was written over time. And the conclusion is that this Ritva published in Taf Pei Tes is not the Ritva. Okay, so what is the Ritva? Does the Ritva exist? So Baruch Hashem, in 1962, Rav Alter Halperin from England publishes the manuscript. He has a Mavi where he deals with the whole story, explaining, proving how this is true, what the Ritva of Taf Pei Tes is, etc., etc. Now, of course, Meister Cook comes along. They have more manuscripts, so they publish it more. Okay. The claim is that this is a Madura Basra of the Ritva, where the Madura Rishona is the Daf up till Daf Yud Beis, but all this can be dealt with in both the fascinating Mavi of Rav Halperin, the brief Mavi of Rav Shila Raphael, and they also explain that if Achreinim would have had the real Ritva, it was Miyash of many things. This is a very valuable thing that one could find in these Mavis. What I find very interesting is they show what's the point of having this thing. They'd say, oh, there's a din in Achreinim, and if you had this Ritva, you would see that he could be Mayashvit. So it's very nice when you have such materials. And they pointed a lot of times they try because they're trying to say the significance of it, but this is one great significance of these introductions of these kinds of svarim. Okay. Moving right, but they do print in the back of the Meister of Cook edition. They print the Maram Galanti, the part of the Ritva it seems to be the Madura Kama of the Ritva until Daf Yud Beis, with footnotes is found in the back of the Cook edition of the Ritva. Okay, so but the point that I'm trying to make out is the real Ritva, the Rajba, the Ramban, these Svarim are only coming out less than 100 years ago. Okay, let's go further. Rima Lonil, only in this century. Taisis Rush, only 1959. Taisis Rabbeinu Peretz, 1970. Chedushi Aran, interestingly enough, it seems that an edition comes out in the 1830s with a famous Haskamer of Akiva Eger. I have an amusing story with it. One time, I think we were learning about Metzia, and someone told me, I asked my Chavrusa in high school, I said, when did the Ran live? So he tells me it must be after Rabbi Akiva Eger, because it has a skama from Rabbi Akiva Eger. So, okay, so he learned at that time that's not what it means. The skama is sometimes about a work much, much earlier, and the Ran and Rabbi Akiva Eger are not in the same time period. Okay. Anyway, Lamais in 1994, the complete edition comes out. The Meiri comes out in 1959. So all what we're seeing over here again and again is the Rishonim wrote about these Masechtas, but it only came out in the past 100 years. Okay, so how do they have Rishonim really, besides for the Mulchamas that some people had? So the answer is Shitim Gebetzes. In 1721, the Shitim Gebetzes is printed under the name Asifas Akanim. It has in the Shar we already see a listing out of the Svarim that it has. Okay. And we'll get to pointing out something interesting about this, but basically they had now all of a sudden they have some materials of the Rajba, the Ritva, the Ramban, but all the editions that came out in our century have much, much more material. Okay. Lamaisa, this is the story of the Rishonim. Now we move into the Achreinim. So as I said, it was learned. We have Marsha, which is printed about 1611. We have Maram, Tyrus Chaim, the incredible Sefer of Tyrus Chaim, which I'm still hoping if we are able to get funding for it to have a whole episode devoted to the Tyrus Chaim, but he dies in 1632. His work on this Masechta also 1624. Excellent Pshat Sefer, also dealing with Haggadah, similar to the Marsha that deals with Haglacha and Haggadah. And I quoted already previously the Shem HaGedolim, which talks about it. He says, "Bepilpul v'svar yishara." Lamaisa, we must mention that Nachi Weinstein just released in the past few days what he worked on, the Tyrus Chaim on Masechtas Avodah Zarah, with a beautiful introduction, published by Mechon Alizayat of Lakewood, and it's available already. I guess copies in Eretz Yisrael, it's available for purchase, and I believe its copies are on the way to America. So there, one could see a history of the Tyrus Chaim. And all different things, and he put out on Masechtas Avodah Zarah, not on Masechtas Bava Kama, but Masechtas Avodah Zarah, and he discusses why he did that also. Okay, moving on. There's a Chibur Beis Yehuda. which is published in 1687. He's the Av Bezdin of Kalish. We spoke a little bit about him in the Chibur, in the Shir about Sfarim Baba Kama. So too Rebbe Reb Heschel, who's not a Rebbe, but he's known as Rebbe Reb Heschel. We also spoke about him a little bit in Masechtas Baba Kama, in the Shir about Sfarim about Masechtas Baba Kama, so we're not going to repeat that here either. Okay, now the Pnei Yeshua publishes in 1756. Okay, so Ad Khan, these are the famous earlier Achreidim, I would say, and then all of a sudden, but what becomes unique to Masechta, so Pnei Yeshua doesn't need any discussion. We know that it changed the world at the time. Why and how exactly that needs to be mapped out, but not for now. Okay, what happens to our Masechta is it comes along a Chibur. Rabbi Yosef Chazoin writes a Chibur, it's published Ein Yosef. So he dies in 1698, but it takes a long time for it to be published in 1735 in the whole Masechta. He's very close to the Knesset Gdoila, and one today could buy it just recently, I believe in the past year. Mechon Zichron Aaron published a beautiful 2-volume edition of this Chibur. And the introduction, an excellent introduction, a material about the Chshivas of the Sefer. For me, what was the exciting thing about the Sefer? The Vilna Gaon, who doesn't really quote Achronim, quotes this work at least 2 times in Choshen Mishpat, which is a very unique feature, as it's believed that the Gra did not really see or quote Achronim. This is something that needs to be clarified out of Saif, but the fact is he quotes this unique Chibur. So this is why it was famous, but now it's but in its time it was very famous and many people used it, and the introduction maps this all out, and it could die to see this work goes through the whole Masechta very, very thorough. Okay, now the Lumdus of this Masechta, one of the early works way back in this Masechta is the Machna Ephraim. It's published first time in 1738, and Rabbi Ephraim Navon, he dies in 1735, but okay, and this remains a classic, one of the Sephardi classics on the Masechta Ad Hayom L'Yeshiva world. Okay, I would like to quote one Marmakam about this Chibur in a very unique source. Many years ago, I came across a book called Esa Einai El Ha'arim Michdavim of Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank to his son, while his son, Reb Yehuda Frank, was learning in Europe in the various yeshivas, and this is a letter while his son was learning in Telz. So Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank, Rav in Yerushalayim, is writing letters weekly to his son. Fascinating letters. This volume is not available. I don't know why not. They printed parts of this volume, calling it Shavive R, I believe it's called, but this actual volume with the full letters is not available. It's not even on the Eitzar Chachma database. Now, over here, in this full volume, it says like this. It seems his son was about to start learning Masechtas Bava Metzia. So he says, "But betach nimtze be'yeshiva sefer Machna Ephraim, hu sefer metzuyon v'kal ma'oy la'ayin boy, ki hu migoyne asvardim v'signon limudam hu ba'ofen echa midarkei chachmei Ashkenaz v'yesham harba nagel Bava Metzia aveda pikadim v'shayim gzela v'aveda shluchan ruchush lecha yedia boy v'yativ lecha." Bekitzer, make sure to learn this sefer. And then he goes on and tells him, in my youth, I had a hara in the Machna Ephraim, this and this thing, and then he writes 2 pages about it, handling and learning about this thing. Okay, so he recommends his son to make sure to learn Machna Ephraim. We move on. There's a Sefer Yad Yosef. So this also in the letters of Tzvi Pesach Frank, I believe he also points out to this Chibur, but this Chibur is a Galicianer Chibur. He was someone who knew Rabbi Ephraim Zal Margolis. This Chibur is published in 1829. And interestingly enough, he met Reb Shlomo Kluger when Reb Shlomo Kluger was very young, and he wrote a letter recommending to Reb Ephraim Zal Margolis and others that this Yid Reb Shlomo Kluger is somebody, and that's why he ended up getting the Steller in Broid, and then he basically remains in the city of Broid, where he becomes Darshan, eventually a Dayan, etc., etc. So it's all from this Yid, the Yad Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Stern. The Sefer has been published many times, even more recently. Okay, he was a great guy in that period of time. Okay. Moving on, we have the Nachos David. So Nachos David, we already spoke about him relating to Masechtas Bava Kama, Talmud Muvik of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, incredible sefer. Sadly, it's not the whole Masechta, but a Merdek, a Clarkite. I mentioned already then, my father used to always tell me that that he felt when he was in yeshiva and Beis Medrash learning, he didn't need a Maggid Shir because it's written so clear, it goes through all the Rishonim. Okay, but this is published in 1864. We mentioned already in Bava Kama that there's an article about his history in Yeshurun. If one wants a copy of this, email me and I'll be more than happy to send. Now, what's interesting in Bava Metzia is here we have a live piece of Torah from Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the Sugya of Halach in the first parak of Bava Metzia. We don't have so many materials of Reb Chaim Volozhiner because his tshuvas were basically destroyed in 3 different fires in Volozhin. But in this Nachos David, Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhiner brings down Chol Pachas in Bava Metzia. In the beginning of Bava Metzia, we can learn a piece of Torah from who? From Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Now, there's an interesting piece from Reb Tzvi Kaplan in his work Me'olam Moishal Torah. This is the son of Ram Elio Kaplan. Baal Ikvis Hayir and other Svarim, also where he deals with in length the Mahalach HaLimud of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. So if one wants to see what is Mahalach HaLimud, what the original Talmud of the Gra, original Rosh Hashiva Volozhin, that's where one should start. So here we have a piece. As they say, I'm Rechin Vegen Kairach, we're talking about Halach. So a recent picture, a volume called Kisvei Tferes Yisrael from manuscripts of Tferes Yisrael was published, and in there we have a unique manuscript of the Tferes Yisrael on the sugya of Halach. Okay, so one could check that out too. Okay, now we're going further into the Achrayim. We have like this Nachlas Yisrael. So this is early Achron on, not early Achron. This is another Volozhiner Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He's a brother of the Amud Yar and Rabbi Shua Heller. These brothers, they're the Heller brothers. There was 4 brothers Sachakol. He's the oldest one. So he was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Amud Yar is a famous guy. Wrote the famous Sefer Amud Yar and some other svarim. Now, one wants to read about this family. There's a beautiful article from Eliezer Katzman, Yeshurun Dalit, and also in Rabbi Sein Shebegoyla, Volume 2, there's an entry on all these 4 brothers. One could learn much more about them. Okay, so he has a chibur called Nachlas Yisrael, which is on Baba Kama and on Baba Metzia. So here we have a Talmud, noch a Talmud from Volozhin, with specifically a Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhin. Just recently, they discovered more materials linking him to Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and that has been published in the Meria, different Hanhagas from Reb Chaim Volozhiner with his own ha'aris on it, and the complete, in Meria, part of it was published, and the complete manuscript was published in the Kavitz Tvunas a few years ago. Okay. Moving on, continuing yet with Volozhin, we have the Beis Halevi, the great Beis Halevi. So in his Chuvas, there are many Chuvas where he deals with at least the first parak, or maybe even more, different sugyas in Bava Metzia. I remember from when I was in 12th grade, my rabbi was fond to go through these various pieces of the Beis Halevi in Bava Metzia. Okay. Again, Nacha Yidun tied to Volozhin is Ramosha Betzal Luria, who was born in 1835. He publishes a Sefer 1880. We've mentioned him in some other Masechtas because he wrote about 7-8 Chiburim. Again, if one wants to see about him, you should see the Rabbi Sein Shebegoyla, beautiful book on Litta, where it talks about him. Again, I refer you to the letters of Ritzi Pesach Frank to his son. He basically, one of the things he comes up time and time again in these fascinating letters of Ritzi Pesach Frank is he would ask his son while he was in Europe, please get me the various svarim, and he has a long list of svarim he would say to get him, and we ask him, why don't you get me this, and to get the stealer, something that svarim collectors could find fascinating, because here we have Ritzi Pesach Frank, the great Gaon of Yerushalayim, and that's how Svarim end up getting to where? To Yerushalayim. He had his son who was learning in Europe at the time. So this time he's already in Mir. So he tells him, there's a sefer that I want. There was a Chashav Yid, Ramosha Betzal Shemai, V'asa Harve Chiburim. If you could get them, there's a Yesh Tehelis Besvarim, would be great. And Lamashal, I don't have, Nefesh Chaim Bava Metzia, and he lists out some others if you could get them. And then he asks him time and time again to make sure, in other letters also, to please get him this particular sefer. Okay, so here we have yet another connection to Volozhin. Moreh Mesada from the Netziv, Lamashal, does not have so much material on Bava Metzia, I'm not sure why. Just to be Messiah, Volozhin is like this, that we have Reb Menachem Ilya, the famous Reb Menachem Ilya, a person who's worthy of a whole episode in its own right. But basically, the Tferes Yisrael, the first Mishnah of Bava Metzia, brings ha'ara of Menachem Ilya on the Mishnah. Already the Torah Tamima brings a whole piece in Makar Baruch about it, and in the book Pshutei Shel Mishnah from Hanan Gafni, he has a whole list of people that deal with this ha'ara of Reb Menachem Ilya about it. But if one wants, I'd be more than happy to send. There's a piece from the Chibur Olei Aaron, a Talmud Muvik of Reb Chaim and the Netziv in Volozhin, where he brings a piece that he heard from Reb Chaim Berlin from the Netziv on this Reb Menachem Ilya. It's a nice Chekava Maramakam, 2 pages dealing with the first Mishnah about Metzia, and here you get to see how they handled with a Menachem Ilya and again with the Vilna Gaon. Okay. Anyway, now just to conclude with the Achrayim and Ha'ara. And then we'll just very briefly say something about Halach L'Maisa. Number one, I keep on saying, now, some of these Achrayim that we just mentioned, they were published, okay, fine. But is any other Chiburim? So the answer is yes. Tons of materials have been coming out and keep on coming out. Just to mention Rabbi Akiva Eiger. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger, there's a work, Ksava Chaisim, published in 1979. It has a lot of material in Bava Metzia from new manuscripts. For some reason, and I don't know why, but I recall in the 90s, this volume disappeared. It seems it got lost. The distributor sent it to America. It was very hard to find. Today, it's very possible to find. But again, here we have, in 1979, beautiful material of Rabbi Akiva Eiger was published. In the year 1990, Rav Moshe Kazis, Chedushim of his, he was a Yid who was nifter in 1617, was published by Mechon Yerushalayim. In 2000, a massive chibur of Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz on Masechtas Bava Metzia. Now, Bava Metzia already has the tumim of the Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz relating to it, but here we have shiurim of Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz published by Mechon Yerushalayim, a massive work. Earlier work published in 2006 from Mechon Yerushalayim is a work of the Maral Prague, not on Agada, but on Halacha. Very not known is that we have materials of the Maral, who was a great Gaon in his lifetime. He's one of the greatest Gadolim of his time, but most of his halachic material didn't survive. Mechon Yerushalayim published a ganze chibur on all of Bava Metzia from the Maral halachadik. That's a key word over here. Okay. Way back, also in the past 20, 30 years, new material, a notebook of Reb Chaim from Shiurim and Bava Metzia was published, and then there was a whole tumult. There was another more chedushim of Reb Chaim Bava Metzia from Mechonei Raisa. That's a deal we already mentioned briefly. If that's considered reliable, we spoke about that already by Baba Kama, but specifically Bava Metzia is reliable. It was published by Professor Chaim Soloveitchik and others. We have a few pieces of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Okay. Just to mention, there was a new materials of Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman that was published. And then, just to be Messiah, this Nakuda is just recently, in the past few months, 2 more works were published that relate to Bava Metzia, new manuscripts. Number one is the Shiurim of Tzvi Hirsch Glickson. So you actually, Tzvi Hirsch Glickson was a son-in-law of who? Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. A Hasidic Yid, a Gaon Olam. And this a whole remarkable story about the survival of this manuscript. He had a Talmud, and basically this Talmud just recently gave it over. It was basically just published recently, and I've been told from people in Lakewood that Shiuri Teres Chaim of Tzvi Hirsch Glickson it's hard to find. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in Varsha, but he also learned by Reb Chaim. So this Tzvi Hirsch Glickson. So there was a recent article in Mishpacha. So basically, this article in English basically caused that in America it's very hard to find it. In Eretz Yisrael, you still could find it. And here is new materials on Bava. So it's Bechlal. This Tzvi Hirsch Glickson was a Gaon Olam, but even here is some new materials of Reb Chaim. The author, Rabbi Ephraim Galinsky, the author of the article in Mishpacha, sent me the article, and I'm able to send it out. If someone asks for a PDF of this beautiful article about this Gaon Olam, son-in-law of Reb Chaim, who basically was killed, and we now have a surviving notebook of some of the shiurim and new materials of Reb Chaim. Okay, fine. One other major maramakim of a new thing, Chassam Sofer. So Chassam Sofer also, his work is, he's one of those people I'd make a joke, is always writing from the grave. So also just now, Bava Metzia, a work came out a few months ago with a few different sugyas, a bunch of materials of his that would never published before. On Bava Metzia, one could get that also. Okay, Ad Kan, the chiburim of Achroinim, and with a particular thing of the manuscripts in very recent years. Okay, now I would like to say ha'ara, and then we're going to conclude with two other sentences going on. The ha'ara is like this. Throughout this episode, we see that Bava Metzia was learned. Okay, now when I remember when I was younger, there was a yeshiva that learned Takfu Kayin, which is one in the first parak. They spent the whole winter's man just on Takfu Kayin. So at the time, I couldn't understand, what are they doing, spending a whole winter's man? It was even a leap year, I think. They spent just learning one sugya. So it was very strange to me. Okay, now on the other hand, we know that Gedolei Olam, such as Reb Shach or Gifter, the Stipler, have written Keseder about the Mahalach Halimut of the yeshiva world. The yeshiva world learns very, very slow. And this is a conversation that needs to be mapped out and barichos nifla. But I want to just make ha'ara based on the information that we see here in front of us. And that is my suggestion is like this. Be'etzem, throughout the generations, they did not have access through the Rishonim and the Achronim. They didn't have all the Rishonim that we have in Bava Metzia. They didn't have. So let's say you have a Yid learning in Mir Yeshiva before World War II. So yeah, he finished all Masechta because all he had in front of him was Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. Maybe he had a Gemara that had Marsha, maybe he had a Gemara that had Melchamas, but for the most part, he probably did not. There's a story, which is a very reliable story, that Reb Shimon, when he would give Shir, and they found out that he's going to speak out a Ksais or a Rashba, there will be a line for 3 days before just to see the Lashon. You say, no one learned the Rashba daily. We walk around today, we have all these Svarim, that's why I'm making a point over here. We have a crazy amount of Svarim, but they didn't have the Svarim. So now it could be that maybe had they had the Svarim, they would have gone slower. Okay, this is a Ha'ara. I'm throwing it out there. It needs to be discussed much more. Now, why am I saying this? Is you find in Masechtas Bava Metzia Dugma, a fascinating thing. There's a chibur from the Maritat on that Mechon Havet Shalom prints out on Ezer Neshech. Okay, then there's a chibur called from Professor Daniel Boyarin, Ha'iyun HaSfardi. He publishes another chibur on another, also, which basically is a massive chibur on 5 blot and Bava Metzia. Turns out, and I'm going to make this very short, it's like this. There's a Mahalach Halima known. Today it's became much more famous. The actual chibur is called, from Rabbi Yitzchak Kampanton, he has a work of Klali HaTalmud. And this work has become very famous, and it's known as the Kampanton Mahalach Halimud. Whatever this Mahalach Halimud is and how it ties into what's originally known as Pilpul, it's intense learning, being medayik in every single letter of the Gemara. Now, this required major iyun, and we now have, thanks to this Bayarin and others, few blot and Bava Metzia, pages and pages. You sit and read it, your head will spin. It's how it's being medayik in every tag tag of the Gemara. Very, very hard to understand. And this Bayarin, I'm more than happy to send a PDF of the actual Sefer because you cannot buy it anymore. But he's published a manuscript this is from the Dar, the Gerish Svara. Now, what does this have to do? They learned crazy beer. Now, if you go back to the Shita and Gobetzes, which I said is published in 1721, he says an interesting line. He says he has, amongst other things, he has from Rabbi Buav, Upirish Sugyis, Tagri Lud, from the Radbaz, and Sugyis Acheris. What is this Ion Svardi Sefer that this Daniel Bayarin has? Also from Talmidim, this is also from the Kampanton base Medrash on the Sugya of Trey Lud found in Bava Metzia. These are chiburim that the Rebbe Tzal Ashkenazi also they learned. Now, whatever it is, we have to map out a different time, not now. But I came across a passage in the Kairi Hadairis. The Kairi Hadairis met a great grandson of Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and it says in this passage that how many times do you think the Rabbi Yosef Cairo learned Shas? Turns out 3 times. What? He learned Shas 3 times? How could that be? The answer is the Beis Yosef was from the Beis Medrash of Kampanton. They learned with intense biyun. After you learn look at this sugya in Bava Metzia, how biyun it is, and as I said, the sefer that the Havat Shalom printed on Ezer Neshech uses iyun. Your head will spin from the cheshbonis that are happening in this Gemara. And Mela, these group of people, they did learn intense biyun, and they didn't learn with anything else. They just had Rashi in front of them. Sometimes maybe Taisis. They didn't learn a parallel sugyas. Okay, anyway, this is just a ha'ara, and this relates to the Mahal Chalim and Limut Chus on our generation, which keeps on going slower and slower, not faster and faster, because Lamaisa, we have a crazy amount of material. Anyway, there's crazy amounts of achroinisha materials. We have the Eitzim Farshia Talmud, 4 massive volumes. There's what's called the Reb Shapsi Frankel Gemara, which we spoke about in Bava Kama. So here there's 905 pages of achroinim in small print based on over 1,000 different svarim. And it doesn't have the nuschayis of the Gemara, which it has in Bava Kama. Why, I don't know, but basically a crazy amount of information of achronim on the ganze Masechta from the beginning till the end. And also even the Talman Gemara in the back has a chibur called Eitz Achronim, a liquid of achronim. Okay. Now just doing an assignment for 1 minute. Halacha l'maisa, this Masechta has a crazy amount. So Elam Metzias, finding Metzias, I just recommend this. Pisrei Chayshin, Ribis, massive topic. Why it's in Yeridea. Nachash Mishpar, it's his own question. There's the Bris Yehuda from Rebloi, and you have the Nesiva Shalom from Gelber, Talmud Muvik of Shmuel Orbach, and also known as the author of the Archa Shabbos. We have Rabbi Reisman, my rabbi, growing up, his book from Art School, excellent book on Hilchos Ribis. We have the Ahavas Chesed, B'chlal and Yonim of Chesed. We hope to give a whole episode to dealing with the concept of what lies behind the Sefer of Chavetz Chaim. There's many articles and material from Professor Chaim Soloveitchik relating to Ribis, both in English, both in Hebrew, Halacha Kalkala V'dimei Atzmi. The Heter Iska, how does this develop, is also a fascinating topic. There's a book from Professor Joseph Schatzmiller called Shailek Reconsidered, Jewish Money Lending and Medieval Society. And we consider there's a lot to talk about on Masechtas relating to Ribis. And then just to be Messiah, one last sentence is, we have Professor Reuven Bumfeld publishes a book called Sefer Malva V'Loiva, which originally was thought to be from the 1700s, a parody work. It turns out it's a few hundred years earlier. He publishes it, and it gives a whole insight into the business world of Italy in the 1600s. And he deals with it greatly in this critical edition that he publishes of the work called Sefer Malva V'Loiva, which is also relating to aspects found in certain prakim of Bava Metzia. So this is just a small titpa shabayam of what exists on this Masechta. So I wish everyone luck to learn this Masechta properly.
Thank you. Fascinating. You mentioned the new sefer with the shiurim and chidushim of Reb Tzvi Hersh Gluckson. Did you also mention that certain people like to talk about Reb Chaim having a Chassidish son-in-law?
No, I did not mention. If you would like to point it out, please be my guest. I did not mention that connection.
For a chassid like me, it's always important, and
Ah,
our listening audience. But what do you have to say?
I don't know. I just know that he was very. This book, the article that if one wants, I'd be more than happy to send out. This book has a nice chapter about it, but he embraced it. So they embraced it. It sounds like from here that they were much more open to Hasidus than people. Even though they're Volozhin, they're from the Reb Chaim Volozhiner, but you see, this is as time moves on, they were more warm. Definitely, he was very warm to this year. Yerutzir Glickson. They held of him unbelievable.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you want to share a new sefer?
Yeah, we'll do one new sefer very briefly, and that is like this. I just got this. It's published by Mosaic Press. It's called Eretz Yisrael, Halacha and Minig, a practical guide for those living, visiting, and traveling in Eretz Yisrael by Reb Chaim Leib Belsky, with a foreword by Reb Yitzchak Berkowitz. Is it Berkowitz? Yeah, Berkowitz. Anyway, it's a very nice sefer, just came out from them, where it deals with, first of all, it's very nicely produced with their graphics. I happen to like a lot. They have maps in the back, but it deals with the Kedushas Haaretz, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, Tefillah, Berachos Kohanim, Bracha, Shabbos, Yom Tov Sheni Dahak, Purim Dahak, funerals, and he basically collects a lot of the material that people think about, even people traveling, not even people that live in Eretz Yisrael, people, because everyone travels to Eretz Yisrael, visiting Eretz Yisrael, a lot of documented sources of Paiskim that he's Malaka from all different current Makairis. It looks very well worth one's, especially if one's going to Eretz Yisrael, and even if not, it's always interesting to know all these halachas. He has a whole miscellaneous section. I see he deals with even Nittelnacht and these type of stuff, Yerichai, etc., etc. But Kitzer, it looks like a very valuable work. It makes a very nice reishim, and I hope to spend a lot of time going through it more carefully soon. But that's a sefer I would like to mention that just came out. I believe it might be available already in America, and Eretz Yisrael it's available in all the stores.
I like when authors call their sefer just like Eretz Yisrael or like Torah. It is what it is. Put it right out there. Is this the same author as the one who wrote on the pets?
Yes, same guy, Chaim Leibelsk. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you very much. Looking forward to our next episode.